In this episode, we look at the costumes of the Star series Outlander, Season 1, coming up. Welcome back to another episode of Costume Co. If this is your first time to the channel, I analyze costumes from some of your favorite TV shows and movies. And if this is something that interests you, then subscribe and hit the bell notification icon so you don't miss a thing. In this episode, we continue looking at the lads' costumes from Season 1 of Outlander. Warning, there will be spoilers for the entire first season of the Star series Outlander. Please refrain from leaving spoilery material on future seasons in the comment section below. Thank you. Murtagh wears the same Outlander tartan as Jamie, but one thing I like about Murtagh's character is that he sings to a different tune, and he shows this through his costume. His costume is functional and no nonsense, but it looks like it would be terrible to the touch. His jacket is a heavy-duty woolen tweed that's finished at the center front and cuffs with cord that's been whip-stitched on, like he did it himself, and it's fastened with toggles that might be made of wood or bone or leather. And the hem of the coat has a frayed raw edge. Murtagh wears a pirate-style leather vest over his jacket instead of under, which was customary. He wears it unfastened with the buckles hanging, but because of the bulk of the coat, it looks like he would have trouble doing it up. As we mentioned before, leather was rarely used in the 18th century. Brenna saying, that's why oilcloth was such a big deal for greatcoats, etc. And it ignores that the lanolin in the woolen garments they were wearing has a natural moisture-wicking tendency. They didn't start doing leather jackets until the process was industrialized. It's definitely a late 19th, maybe to 20th century thing, but it's something I see in pretty much all the Hollywood movies and TV series set in the 17th and 18th centuries. I am resigned now to simply sighing and carrying on enjoying the program. Murtagh wears a grey wool bonnet. We see these soft felt tams on many of the Highlanders on Outlander in Season 1. Brenna states that this is the one aspect of Highlander dress that is irrefutable. People may argue about kilts versus trews. They may argue about tartan, but the tams are everywhere, and Terry Dresbach has them everywhere. This 18th century illustration, The Craigie Beald, by Scottish painter David Allen, depicts variations of the blue bonnet worn by Highlanders. Beginning in the late 15th century, the blue bonnet was knitted in one piece from a thick wool dyed with blue or gray plant dyes like woad and felted to produce a water-resistant finish. Sandy Russo, owner of Knitsy Blonde, which is an Etsy business that produces reproduction Outlander knits, hand-knit accessories, and knitting bags, kindly shared her images of the tam-making process. She tells me that the items that she knits and felts are not necessarily to be accurate to the 18th century, but to be accurate to the costumes on the TV show. Most people want their knitwear for costumes to match the show, she says. So my knitwear is designed to replicate the show's garments' costumes. The tams, pictured here, are hand knit with 100% Highlands wool, and then I hand felt them in hot water with soap. It takes about 25 minutes for the tams to felt. Then I shape them to correct shape and size, and they dry. Here she is pictured on the right wearing the final product. I'll get more to all of the knitwear items in the next 2 videos when I cover the gals. In the meantime, I'll leave a link in the description to Sandy's Etsy page so you can check out all of her beautiful knits. Angus is such a great character, but his costume might be one of my least favorites. You know, to me, it's really flat. He's got the brown kilt, he's got a brown coat, brown baldric, brown belt. You know, many of the lesser character costumes have so much more texture in them that I feel like it's a bit of an afterthought. I think part of the problem, as we stated before, is the tartan, and with his coat, the whole thing looks too monochromatic. His coat looks a bit lighter in this exterior scene, but quite honestly, the only saving grace is his blue bonnet. I think if they had added some mustard, like in his waistcoat, which already has this really nice texture, Or if they had added a brighter colored stock tie, it might have helped. I have no issue with its broken down nature. As Brenna stated, Angus and Rupert's kilts looking more than a little weather beaten is absolutely accurate. This gathering costume is essentially the same, except that it's been cleaned up a bit and they've given him a freshly pressed cravat and a brooch. Rupert's costume suffers the same issues as Angus, and as the two of them are often the comic relief, it would have been good to see something that differentiated them more. I really like Rupert's coat actually, but like Angus, it all sort of blends together when they aren't in broad daylight. Brenna says that the monochrome look is actually a very modern aesthetic. Minimalism wasn't a thing in Western Europe until after the French Revolution. And I'll add that it also appears that both characters knot their plaids rather than wearing brooches. In this studio shot, we see Dougal, who is one of my favorite characters, and here he wears trews with a Mackenzie tartan plaid worn over his left shoulder. The plaid is fastened to his frock coat with an annular brooch. On the left is the Mackenzie tartan from the Celtic Croft, and on the right is Gordon Kirkbright's original design. Here are two examples of Mackenzie tartans from Loch Carron of Scotland. On the left is the ancient Mackenzie medium weight tartan, and on the right is the weathered Mackenzie medium weight tartan. Hunting and weathered tartans, as we've seen, are often more muted. Because he's wearing trews, Dougal's collarless frock coat hangs to just above his knee. The wool fabric is similar to Jamie's, with a very faint tartan pattern. The cuffs are quite large, like Ned Gowan, but more rounded, and the pockets and cuffs have silver buttons and bound buttonholes. According to the V&A, where this 1730s coat is in their collection, it states that the cuffs seen here were known variously as an open cuff or open sleeve. It would have extended well past the elbow in the deep curve shape fashionable at the time. Dougal wears a grey bonnet like Murtagh and Rupert, and knitwear cuffs just under his coat. Brenna has stated that the knits are far too chunky for the time, and we'll get more into that when we look at the women's costumes. But Brenna did question, what would men have done to keep the draft from entering those oversized cuffs? And it's also possible that Dresbach, like I stated before, had to come up with some way of keeping the actors from freezing to death. Here's Dougal without his coat. I'd mentioned that a man would never take off his coat unless he was doing manual labor, but I think in this case, it's largely to show the character's theatricality in the scene. In my humble opinion, Dougal is the sharpest dressed man in the room during the gathering. His coat is just gorgeous, and I love the way the plaid is wrapped up. By the size of the cuffs, it looked like Dougal would have had his coat for some time because it's in excellent condition, like he only takes it out for special occasions. And Brenna adds that Dougal's large cuffs is a sign of prosperity, saying, if you're doing hard labor, you can't have your cuffs getting in the way. If you're a lawyer, like Ned, or a laird, or a brother to the laird, you can have fancy, ostentatious cuffs. Here's a studio shot of the costume so you can get a better idea of what it looks like up close. The coat looks like a near black or midnight blue color in silk velvet. Here's a close-up of the silver metallic trim detail. It's kind of like rows of long flat sequins, and he also has these gorgeous rhinestone buttons. The waistcoat is made from this gorgeous brocade with silver buttons. The whole look is finished off with this white cravat and silver brooch. Of course, the piece de resistance is this Mackenzie brooch. The Latin inscription on the brooch reads, Luceo non uro, which means, I shine, not burn. Here is the first look we see of Colum Mackenzie. This is just me, but for some reason, every time I look at that picture on the right, I think it looks like it was taken in a photo shoot by Austin Powers. Yeah, baby. According to showrunner Ron Mohr, actor Gary Lewis wore special socks that could later be manipulated in the visual effects department to appear bowed. Lewis also wore shoes with wedges in them and practiced the peculiar gait with which Colum walks to better simulate his deformity. The baldric and sword and dirk are largely for show, since Colum suffers terribly from his affliction, Here's Dresbach's sketch of Colum Mackenzie, complete with fabric swatches. Her notes read, Colum dinner great hall, lace jabot, tweed frock coat green with green and silver trim, brown wool waistcoat, brown velvet breeches. Here's a close-up of Colum's coat and waistcoat. As Laird of Castle Leoch, Colum's clothes are richer and more opulent than the other Highlanders, but still more modest than aristocracy. Both the coat and waistcoat have antique brass buttons, the ones on the waistcoat just slightly smaller, as was historically accurate. In this shot, Colum wears the Outlander plaid with a penannular brooch. Now, according to historians, the penannular brooch was not worn in this period. None have been found that date later than the very early Middle Ages. Here's a more formal look for Colum, his costume that he wears for the gathering. And as you can see, the coat is shorter because he's wearing the belted plaid. Here's a studio shot of the costume. Colum's kilt at the gathering is made from the Mackenzie tartan fabric that was specially created for the series. And Brenna says that while Colum's gathering jacket would have been made of a finer fabric instead of tweed, since Harris tweed wasn't around in 1740, it doesn't detract from the accuracy of the costume because it reads correctly during the scene. Here's a few more details of the costume. So pictured on the left is a sporran, which is a pouch that performs the function of pockets. And a silver annular brooch is fastened to the sporran that's worn on Colum's belt. And on the right, the jacket is trimmed with metallic mesh trim. Colum wears his linen robe with a fur collar in episode 10 in his private chambers. Here's Dresbach's design of the costume. Her notes say, Colum, banyan private rooms, quilted linen, fur collar, cuffs and trim, fur-lined, knee-length great effects. Here's a close-up of the fur shawl collar. Ian, like his wife Jenny, wears clothes woven in homespun textiles and they're dyed with natural colors. His outfit is still quite good. The bound buttonhole detail on his coat is lovely, and like Jamie's coat, appears to be for decoration only. This isn't the wardrobe department's area, but I have to say I'm not really crazy about his wig. His hair actually looks much better here when it's not smoothed back so much. I added this costume of Hugh Munro because it's Terry Dresbach's favorite costume in season 1. She says that it was one of my favorite characters in the book. I couldn't wait to do this costume. This is the kind of costume you can be totally free with because no one is looking, no one cares about the beggar. It was and is a source of design joy. Terry said, Hugh Munro, damn, I love this costume. Look at those beggar badges, the textures, the layers, the pure craft of it all. Ladies and gentlemen, Hugh Munro. Ned is certainly one of my favorite characters. Dresbach loved costuming Ned Gowan, saying, oh, how much I love this costume. Ned Gowan is one of my favorite characters in the book, and this costume was so much fun to do. Bill Patterson is perfection. Such a lovely, lovely man. Here's a good look at Ned's velvet coat, waistcoat, and cravat. His costume is very simple and no-nonsense, although with plenty of texture and contrast, and there is a great amount of distress that's been done to his costume. Dresbach says, our aging and dyeing team did a fabulous job on this. Here's a simple British wool coat, just slightly later in the 18th century, that's from the Met. The notes on this costume state that the British sensibility was less ostentatious than the French, and that certainly is the case with Ned Gowan's costume. Here's a great head-to-toe shot of Ned. You can see that his frock coat has rather large cuffs that indicate his affluence. Also, I'm not certain if he's wearing trews or breeches. And finally, while it looks like he's wearing knee-high boots, those are actually leather gaiters worn over top of his boots. I especially love his two-tiered tartan cloak. This painting, titled A Man Wearing a Blue Cloak, is by Venetian painter Luca Calvarges from the beginning of the 18th century. I'd like to think that Terry Dresbach might have been inspired by this painting, but of course, I can't know for certain. Here's a close-up of his cloak and the tartan wool that the cloak is made from. I'll add that Ned is one of the few principal characters in season 1 that wears a wool felt tricorn, or a three-pointed hat. During the 18th century, hats of this general style were referred to as cocked hats and not tricorns. Here's an example of a wool-felt Italian tricorn hat from the mid-18th century that's on display at the Met. This hat is trimmed with gold and black ribbon cockade, much fancier than Ned's black braid. I think my favorite man's costume from season 1 is Taran MacQuarrie. He's wearing trews and a Culloden-style short coat with a waistcoat with a light stand-up collar and plaid. And from the looks of it, his trews are cut on the bias, which would give the pants a bit of stretch. And the interesting thing about his sash, unlike almost everyone else, is that his plaid is a Harris tweed and not a tartan fabric. The best part, though, is his coat, which appears to be slashed. It looks like they took some navy wool and slashed it, and then they laid it over top of some burgundy wool and then felted the whole thing. The coat is cut short, which, as I mentioned earlier, is usually worn with the belted plaid. And the coat and buttonholes are bound with leather and finished off with these beautiful pewter-looking buttons. And then the whole look is capped off with these knee-high leather boots. He also has a very nice embossed silver brooch on his plaid, which is one of the prettier ones I've seen on the men. For fun, I thought I'd throw in Ron D. Mohr's costume for his walk-on scene for the gathering. Not surprising, Ron gets this aristocratic blue velvet frock suit. The costume's coat and cuffs are ornamented with this gorgeous gold metallic embroidery and trim, and then the outfit is finished off with a lacy cravat. Lucky for Ron, he already has shoulder-length hair to pull into a queue, so no wig is required. On the left is Dresbach's sketch of the costume, and on the right, his costume in the wardrobe on display. Here's a similarly cut costume that's on display at the Met. So this Italian suit dates between 1740 and 1760, and it's made from silk velvet, metal, cotton, and linen. And according to the notes on this item, the waistcoat can be matched to the suit because of the matching buttons. And that concludes this episode of the Costumes of Outlander. In the next episode, we look at the costumes of the Outlander lasses, so make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss anything. And I want to send a thank you to Brenna Barks and Sandy Russo from Knitsy Blonde for helping me make this video possible. And as always, thank you for watching.